Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the Today's Dietitian webinar, Modern Day Human Magnesium Requirements, the RDN's Role, presented by Dr. Andrea Rosanoff and Dr. Stella Volpe. Today's Dietitian is the only independent magazine written specifically for registered dietitians and nutrition professionals. Today's Dietitian is proud to be the recognized resource for practical, reliable, and interesting information for dietetics professionals. Before we start the presentation, I have 2 points of housekeeping. First, in order to claim your CPE credit, you will have to remain with us through the entire hour-long presentation. Second, at the end of the session, our presenters will be taking questions. If you have a question, please type it in the question box in your control panel, and we will try to address as many questions as time allows. Today's presentation is brought to you free of charge through the support of NatureMade. Please note that NatureMade provided financial support only and did not have input into the information provided in this course. Dr. Rosanoff reports the following relevant disclosures: grants or research support from Adobe Springs Water Company, LLC, consultant to Nutranext, Neolife International, LLC, and Jigsaw Health, honorarium from Pharmavite, LLC, and royalties from Nutranext and MG Products, LLC. Dr. Volpe has no relevant disclosures to report. They have both certified that no conflict of interest exists for this program. Dr. Rosanoff received her PhD in nutrition from the University of California at Berkeley. She served as Senior Chemical Information Specialist at Dialogue Information Services and as Information Analyst at Chevron Research and Technology Corporation. She is currently an independent scholar with expertise in nutritional magnesium. Dr. Rosanoff is the co-author of The Magnesium Factor, a book on magnesium and heart disease, and has conducted original research for publication in scientific journals. In 2005, Dr. Rosanoff formed the Center for Magnesium Education and Research. The center conducts research into all aspects of nutritional magnesium and attempts to inform the world of their findings. Dr. Volpe is professor and chair of the Department of Nutrition Sciences at Drexel University College of Nursing and Health Professions. She's a nutritionist and exercise physiologist whose work on obesity and diabetes prevention, body composition, bone mineral density, and mineral metabolism and exercise represent more than a decade of consistent funding. Prior to beginning her appointment as professor and chair in January 2011 at Drexel, Dr. Volpe was on faculty at the University of Pennsylvania from 2004 to 2019. Prior to that appointment, Dr. Volpe was on faculty at the University of Massachusetts from 1994 through 2003. Thank you and welcome, Dr. Rosanoff and Dr. Volpe.
Thank you so much, Jack. We're glad to be here, and we're glad that everybody has signed up to hear what we hope will be an interesting talk. Now, both Dr. Volpe and myself are very interested in magnesium, but we get most of our information, in fact, practically all of it, not from our education in minerals and nutrition in our undergraduate and graduate work, but by reading the peer-reviewed research, which is extensive and long-standing in the field of nutritional magnesium. And we're assuming that many of you, maybe all of you, have not had a course in magnesium in your education, not even maybe a full lecture in magnesium. And so today we want to bring to you the new information that is out there on nutritional magnesium requirements and and the importance of those requirements. And this is based all on the peer-reviewed research as well as mostly government resources for data. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Volpe.
Thanks, Dr. Rosanoff. I'd like to start, and it's a pleasure to be here and an honor to be able to present to all of you. Thanks for joining in. The next couple of slides, I'm simply going to go over some of the widespread and critical basic functional roles of magnesium. So most magnesium is as magnesium ATP. It's involved in both DNA and RNA and protein synthesis. It's also involved in membrane structure, and magnesium plays a critical role in sodium-potassium cellular balance. In addition, magnesium plays big roles in glycolysis and Krebs cycle, also with vitamin D activation, as well as control of cholesterol biosynthesis. Magnesium is well known for its role in muscle relaxation and it encompasses about 80% of known metabolic functions in the body. So magnesium is a very important mineral, as are most micronutrients, all of our micronutrients, but you could see the roles it plays are from synthesis all the way to energy expenditure. And why is adequate magnesium nutrition important? Well, magnesium has been associated with several human disease states, including hypertension, heart disease, stroke, arrhythmias, atrial fibrillation, and dyslipidemia. In addition to respiratory effects, magnesium has been shown to affect either as a deficiency with asthma, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and other lung and respiratory issues in the body. From a musculoskeletal perspective, it may affect low back pain, osteoarthritis, other musculoskeletal issues, and is involved in osteoporosis as well as sarcopenia, which is the loss of muscle which typically occurs either after the age of 40 or during disease states. It plays a critical role in diabetes prevention and also in metabolic syndrome. And from the central nervous perspective, things listed here such as depression and anxiety, as well as stress, addiction, migraine headaches, pain relief, ADHD, and sleeplessness. And finally, with respect to immunity and other issues, magnesium plays a role in preeclampsia during pregnancy, kidney disease, Crohn's disease, chronic fatigue syndrome, colon inflammatory diseases, inflammation, and as with some cancers. And now I'd like to hand it back to Dr. Rosanoff.
Thank you. What I want to talk about now are the intakes of magnesium in the USA and how they compare with the requirements. On this slide, we have in milligrams per person per day, which are along the y-axis, and the years of the NHANES studies going along the x-axis. These dots here are the mean magnesium intake per day of those surveys for all adults age 20 plus. So you can see that the intake for magnesium over these years was around 250 milligrams a day in 1977 and has gone up to around 300 to 310 to 320 milligrams per day in 2016. Now, how does this compare with the RDAs? Well, the female RDA for adults is 310 to 320 milligrams per day. The one for the male is 410 to 420 milligrams per day. So you can see that the RDAs are above what the mean intake is, but of course we separated out the men and the women for the intakes. We still get this, the female intakes are lower than the mean in this case. But what we have to consider is something that we've learned since the RDAs were published in 1997, and that is that these RDAs were set for a standard reference body weight, which for women was 133 pounds and for men was 166 pounds. Well, since 1997, there has been, as you all well know, a rise in obesity and a rise generally in body weight. And so by 2016, according to the CDC, the female American average body weight was not 133 pounds, but 168.5 pounds for an RDA of magnesium of around 410 to 420 milligrams a day, not the 310 to 320, and certainly above the intake of around 300 of the average intake. For the men, the actual average body weight of the USA adult male is 195.7 pounds, giving them an estimated RDA of around the 490 milligrams per day mark. So you can see that one thing that we've learned since 1997, when the DRIs were last published for magnesium, is that the standard reference weight is no longer the way to appropriately assess a magnesium requirement for any person, and certainly not for adults. It really needs to be done per body weight, because we now know, because of the work Nielsen and the others at the in the South Dakota USDA lab there, that magnesium requirement is proportional to total body weight. We used to use lean body mass, but now we know it's total body weight. And so, oh, sorry, pressed the wrong button. But there's another issue that we have to take into account here. In addition to the differences in just the standard reference weight to the actual body weight, there's also a factor that was used for the RDAs of 2.38 milligrams magnesium per pound for females, 2.5 milligrams magnesium per pound for males. And since 1997, when these were published, we have realized that these represent two homeostatic mechanisms for magnesium: absorption and kidney excretion. Now, we know that when dietary intake of magnesium is somewhat low, that the body's physiology will adapt and absorb more of the percentage of magnesium in the incoming diet, supplements, water, whatever. At the same time, the kidney's physiology will squeeze and minimize the excretion in the urine of magnesium. And for a long time, these were the two homeostatic mechanisms that were assessed in assessing the requirements for magnesium. But we recently now know that there's a third mechanism of magnesium homeostasis, and that is translocation of storage magnesium into the general circulatory system to maintain the magnesium status that is so necessary for what you saw before of 80% of metabolic functions requiring magnesium. Its role as a structural component of most ATP makes it a vital nutrient for life itself, not only in human beings, but in plants, animals, bacteria, and everything. So it's a very basic nutrient for life, and so the human physiology has adapted to keep it up and center so that there's always adequate magnesium. So in addition to the absorption being able to be a point of physiological homeostatic control, and control of kidney excretion being able to do the same thing, we also now know that if magnesium intake is chronically low, there is a gradual but steady drawing from the magnesium stores to keep things going, and so that the body is adequate. And these are not picked up by a balance study. What happens with a balance study is after you finish the balance study, and they can be in balance, then if you give a large supplement to that person, if they have been depleting their magnesium stores, then they will retain a large portion of that extra magnesium coming in. And this is a condition that has been named now CLMD, chronic latent magnesium deficit. And Dr. Volpe will be telling you a little bit more later in this lecture of how you can assess whether a person has depleted magnesium stores or CLMD or not. But where we are, back to our slide now in the current one, we have had to go to the old literature. There's a seminal study of 1965 in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, which is the only one that has assessed all of the magnesium human balance studies according to body weight. And what they found was that in order to have not only balance in magnesium and to give the requirement, but to forestall any depletion of magnesium stores, then not the 2.38 or the 2.5 milligrams magnesium per pound is necessary, but 3 milligrams magnesium per pound is necessary, which puts the RDA for men and women adults at around 504 to 594 milligrams per day, certainly much higher than the current RDAs and certainly higher than the intakes that we've been experiencing over the last 30 years. Now, you might say, my goodness, this is certainly a big difference and is awfully high, don't you think? Well, let's take a look at some of the traditional diets. Traditional diets that we have data for come in at around, for adults, 350 to 713 milligrams magnesium per day. And I've listed them here. These are some Bedouin tribes. These are poverty neighborhoods in India as late as 1998, Ceylon medical students in 1950, and Australia Aborigines. And so they come in with people on traditional diets well above 350 and up to over 700 milligrams a day, which puts us into the range of the requirements that we're talking about, putting the RDAs down, as you can see, the existing RDAs low in terms of adequacy. And also we have a estimate of a Paleolithic diet in magnesium at over 1,200 milligrams magnesium per day. So I just want to have you keep these in mind as you're going forward on how do you assess magnesium. Now, if we're low in magnesium in the United States, what gender groups might you be on the lookout for? And here I have the NHANES study from 2005-2006. These bars represent the percentage of each gender group that is below their EAR for magnesium. And of course, the EAR is set to provide the requirement for 50% of the population. And you can see that the teenagers, the 14 to 18-year-olds, and the elderly above 70 are definitely above 50%, and those are the groups that you're going to find the most magnesium deficit or CLMD in. But I want you to remember that this graph here is set for the DRI standard reference body weights, which for adult, remember, is 133 pounds for women and 166 pounds for men. For teenagers is 125 pounds for girls and 142 pounds for boys, 88 pounds for children 8 through 13. Keep this in mind as you're looking, because really these are underestimates, therefore, of what the real requirement is for our population because of the rising body weights that we've been seeing for the last 20, 25 years. Well, in addition to magnesium for body weight correction that has to be made, as well as making sure there's enough magnesium intake to prevent depletion of magnesium stores, to prevent CLMD, to prevent chronic latent magnesium deficit, we also have to think about calcium balance. How much calcium is coming in? Because this is an important aspect that can affect magnesium status. And I'm going to talk about another seminal series of studies that was done in the 1990s by Larry Resnick, a physician who is studying hypertension in human beings. He found a unifying factor in the cellular makeup, the ionic ratio between calcium and magnesium in several tissues of hypertensive people. He found vasoconstriction in the smooth muscle cell and heart muscle cells of these patients had a higher than normal calcium to magnesium ratio. In addition, the platelets that had this high ratio were sticky and prone to clot. And also, in general tissues, he found cholesterol overproduction in the cells and tissues that had the high calcium to magnesium ratio. All of these three aspects, of course, are some of the core issues we see with all the cardiovascular diseases. In addition, in liver cells, he found hyperglucose production. And in muscle and fat cells, he found it was more difficult for them to uptake glucose when their calcium to magnesium ratio was high. In the pancreas cells, those with the high calcium to magnesium ratio showed hyper-excretion of insulin with, of course, hyperinsulinemia. All of these aspects, these last four, leading to hypertension, high blood glucose, insulin resistance, and therefore the core issues of type 2 diabetes. So the calcium to magnesium ratio, at least at the cellular and tissue level, is certainly highly implicated in cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes, two of the major chronic diseases of our time. So, how is our nutrition in the United States of calcium and magnesium? Well, here I have the average intakes of all people from foods for the years 1977 up to 2013-14 for magnesium, which is in blue, and calcium, which is in red. And you can see that over these years, magnesium intakes have risen about 16%, which is very close to what the caloric intake has risen over that time. But you can see that the calcium intakes have risen much more rapidly than that, in fact, 41%. Now, what does this matter? Well, traditionally, we know that the calcium to magnesium intake ratio that is probably most healthy is around 2.0 weight to weight. In other words, for every 1,000 milligrams of calcium from all sources, from food and water and supplements, you want to have ideally 500 milligrams of magnesium to be in calcium to magnesium intake balance. We now know that the safe range, we think, and this is budding research, we think it's around 1.7 to 2.5 to 2.6. And remember, this is a weight-to-weight ratio that I'm using today. Some of the publishers will do a molar ratio of calcium to magnesium, and so the numbers are different and you'll have to convert. But today we're going to be just talking to the calcium to magnesium weight-to-weight ratio so we don't get, too many numbers here. And in the United States, our ratio in 1977 was 2.6, certainly up right at the high safe range, because we know that if the intake ratio is above 2.6 weight to weight calcium to magnesium, then people with certain genetic polymorphisms have a much higher risk of developing colon cancer. People without the polymorphism can have the higher ratio and they don't develop the risk. People with the polymorphism, if their intake calcium to magnesium is below 2.6, 2.7, they also do not develop the risk. So there's an interaction between the dietary calcium to magnesium intake ratio and at least this one type of cancer, and we've been seeing that there's a little bit more research in other cancers too. Well, around 2000 and 2001, our country's mean intakes of calcium and magnesium went up to 3.0 and have remained there pretty much ever since. So we are above, ideally, what the safe range for calcium to magnesium intake is. Well, what does this mean? On this rose-colored bar I just put in there, that is what the calcium, what it would be if we had the RDA levels for adults of magnesium intake, 300 to 400 milligrams per day. You can see that that would raise up lower the calcium to magnesium intake ratio. And this orange bar is the body weight corrected RDA intake, around 400 to 500 milligrams per day. And then this green bar is if we had the RDA adjusted for both body weight and for the prevention of CLMD or the prevention of the depletion of magnesium stores. What would be the ratios compared in 2001 and 2002 if we had had those? Well, if everybody had been taking the RDA as set, the ratio would not be 3, as it actually was. It would be between 2 and 2.8, certainly going up into the higher range of the more dangerous areas on a long-term basis. For the body weight corrected, the orange one, the ratio is just perfect, 1.7 to 2.1. That is very safe, and it has room then for calcium supplementation or even higher high calcium food intakes and still be in the safe range if one wanted to up somebody's calcium intake. In the range that's corrected for both body weight and for non-depletion of magnesium stores, the ratio is a little bit low, 1.5 to 1.7, but it's definitely open for higher calcium intake in those cases. So let's see where those ratios are as late as we have there, 2013 to 2014. You can see at this point, if somebody is taking just the RDA, the actual RDA for magnesium, 310, 320 for women, 410, 420 for men, that they're given the calcium intake just from foods, and this does not include supplements and it does not include water, that the calcium ratio is 3.2, certainly too high, not safe on a long-term basis. For the body weight corrected RDA, in other words, from about 400 to 500 milligrams a day for women and men, the ratio is very good, 1.9 to 2.4. That's a healthy ratio. And if people had intakes in the body weight corrected as well as corrected to prevent CLMD, then the ratio is 1.7 to 1.9, an excellent ratio of calcium to magnesium in today's day, and also room for calcium supplementation. In addition to the calcium intake, the body weight, and for having a requirement to prevent the depletion of body stores and preventing CLMD, you have to take into account stress. Stresses have a huge impact on magnesium need. And here we have a list of some of the stresses from the peer-reviewed literature that interact with magnesium status, either affecting it or are affected by noise, hunger, cold, heat, immobilization, poisoning, trauma, injury. I want you to specifically note medical procedures and surgery, hospital stays, and intense physical exercise, high emotions, fear, anxiety, psychological problems, political intolerance, political friction, something that's been high in our country lately, awareness of potential military attack, mortal danger, childbirth, aggression, hostility. Now, if a person has adequate magnesium stores and they come up against one of these traumas, one of these acute stresses, they will draw from their stores and they will meet the challenge of the environmental stress, and they will be okay. They may be more depleted in their stores as they go on, and it would be good to have them replenished with dietary magnesium over a long therapy period, but they will not die. However, if a person has had a chronic suboptimal magnesium intake for a long time, or a family has had one through a couple of generations, and they're walking around with chronic latent magnesium deficit without anybody realizing it, if they come across one of these stresses, high acute stresses, they can be overwhelmed by not having complete adequate magnesium stores. And in those cases, we will see a low magnesium event, which can be as simple as atrial fibrillation and all the way up to sudden cardiac death. In addition, there are common drugs out there that interact with magnesium. I want to specifically mention the proton pump inhibitors and antacids that lower serum magnesium, the thiazide diuretics, cancer therapy drugs lower the magnesium drastically. We are in the research process of trying to find out, the world research, of whether this is part of the therapy, is to lower the magnesium so the cancer cells cannot thrive in a low magnesium environment. We do know that low magnesium before cancer starts can make cancer more likely to develop in cell culture. But after the cancer is developed, then giving magnesium doesn't necessarily help stop the cancer. Also, there's some medicines that can spare magnesium. Aspirin, A lot of heart disease patients are taking aspirin every day. They're sparing their magnesium, and it's a genuine help. The blood pressure medications have some of the same attributes, lithium and vitamin D. So in summary, let's take a look at what happens with low magnesium status at the cell tissue level. When magnesium is low in the cell, there's a calcium rush into the cell, and we're treating these days with calcium channel blockers. The hyperstress reactions of the body impinging on a low magnesium environment, we're treating not with magnesium but with beta blockers. High cholesterol, we're treating with statins. Blood clots, we're treating with blood thinners. High blood pressure, we're treating with antihypertensive medications. Sodium-potassium imbalance, we're treating with antihypertensive medications and low-sodium diets rather than high magnesium diets, although the DASH diet, I believe, is a high magnesium diet. Arteriosclerosis, we're treating with bypass angioplasty surgery. Type 2 diabetes, we're treating with insulin, metformin, and other glucose-lowering prescription drugs. Depression and anxiety, there's a lot of antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications out there. Inflammation, in a low magnesium, high calcium to magnesium ratio situation in tissues, there can often be a reaction of inflammation of the immune system when there's really no call from the environment to do so, because low magnesium is a stress within itself. And so we are treating those kinds of things that are coming up more and more with anti-inflammatory meds. And cancer I want to be cautious with you about because, as I said before, all the ones above, magnesium supplementation is safe and good to give, but with cancer it's not so simple. So why is our magnesium intake so very low in the USA? Well, common ideas are decreasing nutritional contents of foods that's due to soil depletion of magnesium, and that there is decreasing nutritional content of foods, but it is not by soil depletion of magnesium. That idea really has not been backed up in the peer-reviewed literature. What is happening is that since the 80s and the 90s, with the high-yield cultivars that have been used in our crops, the emphasis on high yield has caused what we realize now, a mineral depletion effect. There's lower calcium, there's lower selenium, there's lower copper, there's lower iron, and there's definitely lower magnesium as we go with the higher and higher and higher yield cultivars. But they're just beginning to realize this, say, in the last 10 or 15 years, and my guess is they'll be starting to go for cultivars that have a high yield as well as high mineral contents. But at this point, we don't believe that this change in our food crops for high yield is in fact affecting the nutritional level of human beings. What is affecting them are poor food choices amidst huge processing losses of magnesium in both food and water. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, the milling of wheat loses 56% of the calcium, 70% of the phosphorus and the potassium, almost 60% of the zinc, and a whopping 82% of the magnesium, just going from whole wheat to refined wheat flour. That's a big loss in magnesium. The sugar cane and sugar beets are high magnesium crops as they come off the farm, but we're processing them into sugar, and there's a loss of essentially 100% of the magnesium. The same with oil seeds. Oil seeds are a high magnesium crop, but when we convert them into oil, there's a loss of about 100% of the magnesium. And of course, the oils and the sugar and the flours, the refined flours, are what go together into much of our packaged processed foods that everybody so loves and are so easy to pick up and eat. They're high energy, they taste good, but they are low in magnesium. In addition, during the 20th century, there was a big switch from well and surface water to municipal water systems. There was a big drop in magnesium intake at that time from water. And then in the early half of the century, we started softening the water for industrial reasons, and that meant taking out the calcium and the magnesium from the hard water. That meant for the second half of the 20th century and on into, of course, our present, much lower magnesium intakes from our water, drinking water, than we had before. In the late 20th century and into now, we also have seen a switch to deionized bottled water as the source of water, which, of course, has zero magnesium. So these are the processing losses that have affected our diet. And here's some pictures that I took in Merida, Mexico, around 6 years ago, which I believe is a culture that is in transition between its traditional diets and incorporating into their daily lives the modern processed food diet more and more. You can see in the top row the root crops, the whole grains, the fruits and the vegetables. When one is surrounded only by these kinds of foods, and that's all you can pick up to eat, it is hard to get a low magnesium diet. Adults easily get 600 milligrams a day when they live in an environment such as these. But you can see down in the bottom row the things that are more and more available at the store. These processed packaged foods with sugars, high fructose corn syrup, which again takes corn, which is a good source of magnesium, down to zero again, and the oils and so on. This is the low magnesium diet that as people have the wealth to go and purchase at the stores, they will integrate these into their diets, and their magnesium intakes really drop from the 600 range down to the 200 and 300 milligram per day range that we're at, and even lower. And just quickly, I want to show you these three breakfasts compared. If we're going between 500 to 600 milligrams magnesium per day, we certainly want to have between 150 and 200 milligrams magnesium at each of our three meals. Well, and here the first one's the fried egg, sausage, refined toast with butter and orange juice, only 28 milligrams magnesium. If we had the whole wheat toast, it would be 47, not high enough. Medium bagel with lox and cream cheese and orange juice, 51. Again, if we had a whole wheat bagel, it would up. The only one that comes close is oatmeal with 2% milk, 2 ounces of pecans, because nuts are very high in magnesium, 4 ounces of blueberries for 151. And I show you this slide because I want you to remember how easy it is in our environment to choose a low magnesium diet. So how can you better ensure your patients improve their diets to get better magnesium intakes? Well, you know, whole grains, legumes, seeds, nuts, fruits and vegetables, leafy greens, magnesium-rich drinking water if you can possibly do it, and every day, every meal, lifelong. And you know as well as I do how difficult that is for people living in our culture surrounded by the low magnesium processed foods. But among your patients and clients, you also need to ask, are they taking any meds that are affecting their magnesium need? Are they overweight or obese? Can you calculate their requirement given their body weight? Is their calcium intake especially high, or are they taking calcium supplements? Are they high stress at the current time, or have they had a past stressful or traumatic event that may have depleted their magnesium stores, and therefore, along with a low chronic intake and maybe some stresses in their past, they have CLMD, and they need to have a nutritional program to replenish those magnesium stores if they are going to have a full, healthy life and minimize their chances of developing the chronic diseases. So how are you going to do that? Well, the factors we have now to estimate magnesium RDA for healthy people, we're going to use a factor that I'm publishing here times their body weight in pounds. And let's take a look for 2 to 6 months, you want to take their body weight times 2. For 7 to 12 months, the factor is 4.5 milligrams magnesium per pound. For 1 to 18 years, you're going to have to decide it's between 3 and 4. 3 is the low, 4 is the high, and you have to assess what is their status. Do you think what has been their past intake? How do you think their stores might be, and so on? And remember, you can always start low and go high, and you can always start high and go low. For adults 19 plus years, the factor is 3. Take their body weight, multiply it by 3, and that's what you want to shoot for their magnesium intake. A healthy magnesium intake if they're healthy people. This can go as high as 4.5, this factor, but not any higher than that. You don't want to get chronically too much magnesium. And these figures come from Selig, 1964, the paper I was telling you about before, who made an analysis of the human magnesium balance studies and on a per-pound basis. And she realized that at this number 3 will make sure that nobody is in negative magnesium balance in a balance study, but also it is almost the optimal level for retaining calcium. And so that's how we got that number. We don't want to go up above 4.5, even if they're in a high-stress situation. But if you have somebody who is several deficit symptoms, they are in a very high-stress situation, or they're just coming out of a very high-stress situation, and their dietary magnesium has been low, then you might want to take that 3 factor up to 3.5, 4, or in severe cases even 4.5, but not much higher than that. For teen girls that are pregnant or lactating, the value is between 3 and 4 milligrams magnesium per pound. And for adults that are pregnant or lactating, the value is 3. So here's just a sample of body weights of adults. If a 100-pound person is going to have a requirement of 300 milligrams a day, if they're, say, 225 pounds, that requirement goes all the way up to 675 milligrams per day. This is hard to do with diet, as you well know. It's hard for people to stay on a DASH-like diet, which has about 600 milligrams magnesium per day, for a long period, day in and day out basis. So I'm going to turn this now over to Dr. Volpe, who's going to talk about the role that magnesium supplements might play.
Thank you, Dr. Rosanoff. So magnesium supplementation can certainly have beneficial effects in adults who have to raise their serum magnesium concentrations. It also has been shown to be effective in individuals who suffer from migraine headaches. In addition, it has been shown magnesium supplementation may play a role in fibromyalgia, as well as decreasing anxiety and depression. Magnesium also plays a role in bone metabolism and turnover, so it can help prevent or actually cause normal bone metabolism and turnover. And more evidence, very strong evidence, is that magnesium supplementation can play a role in the reduction of hypertension, as well as reducing glucose, high-density lipoprotein, low-density lipoprotein cholesterol, and triglyceride concentrations. In addition, magnesium may help prevent atherosclerosis or reverse atherosclerosis, and may help with individuals who have atrial fibrillation. Magnesium supplementation may also help with mitral valve prolapse, as well as in the prevention of gallstones. In addition, there is some promising evidence that supplemental magnesium might play a role in epilepsy, Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, and in individuals post-stroke. So how do you know when to initiate oral magnesium therapy? Well, that would be as a result of evaluating magnesium status, of course, but the best way to assess magnesium status is not usually conducted. And how much magnesium via supplementation is genuinely beneficial, and Dr. Rosanoff just stated that previously. And then how do you monitor oral magnesium therapy? And then again, that would be by assessing magnesium status, which I will discuss. So there are various ways to assess magnesium status. Serum magnesium, as I stated, is the most common method of assessing magnesium status. But most of you know that serum magnesium is not the best way to assess magnesium status, because there is a delay in what serum magnesium would show when a person may already be magnesium deficient. assessing red blood cell magnesium has not been as consistent, but assessing ionized magnesium, which we actually do in our laboratory, is one of the easiest and best ways to assess magnesium status because it actually evaluates what magnesium is at that time. The gold standard to assess magnesium status is called the magnesium loading test. What the magnesium loading test is that an individual would need to be injected with serum with magnesium, and then their urine is collected over a 24-hour period. Now, we have done this over a 4-hour period so that our participants in studies do not have to stay the entire day or bring their urine back the next day. However, 24 hours is considered the gold standard. And if someone absorbs greater than 80% of the magnesium that was provided or retains it rather, not absorbs it, but retains it, then that is indicative of them having a magnesium deficiency. Although the magnesium loading test is this gold standard, it is both expensive and time-consuming. So therefore, it is not practical to use on a daily basis or within hospitals even. It can certainly assess chronic latent magnesium deficit that Dr. Rosanoff has described earlier. Other easier ways to assess magnesium status, but they're not as robust, include dietary questionnaires, which we know that are not perfect simply because people's recall isn't perfect, and that goes for all of us, so that we have a difficult time remembering sometimes what we had yesterday. At least I do. And then assessing magnesium deficiency symptoms is also another way that we can assess magnesium status, but two issues with that are, one, it could certainly be too late in the sense that a person may be have a large magnesium deficiency, and also those symptoms may not be related solely to magnesium deficiency. So all these together combined could be helpful. For example, having a person assessing their dietary intake as well as maybe assessing ionized magnesium or even serum magnesium, although it is not the best indicator, could be combined, could be a better way for us to evaluate magnesium status. And now I'd like to turn it back over to Dr. Rosanoff.
Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about total serum magnesium concentration. In most of the clinical labs that are available to you probably will be not ionized magnesium, but total serum magnesium. How can this be properly used? Well, you can see here on this chart the current reference interval for serum magnesium, of which we have all along the top line, from hypomagnesemic, symptomatic, these people are usually in the hospital, asymptomatic hypomagnesemia, and then what's considered to be the normal reference range from 0.75 to 0.955 millimoles per liter, and on up top to the asymptomatic hypermagnesemia and the symptomatic hypermagnesemia, which begins at around 2 millimoles per liter magnesium. Now, there are other units out there. There's milliequivalents per liter and milligrams per deciliter, so be sure and take a look at the units on the reports that you have, and you might have to do some converting. But the current reference interval in millimoles per liter is now 0.75 to 0.955. But what we are having recommended is that the proposed reference interval for true health is 0.85 up to 0.955. If the serum magnesium comes into this range, it is suggested that that is a healthy magnesium status, but I have seen other research where they have said anything below 0.9 millimoles per liter really needs to have a magnesium supplementation program. But according to this one, if you find the serum magnesium in what's the normal range but below 0.85, in other words, between 0.75 and 0.85 millimoles per liter, it would be wise to assume CLMD, chronic latent magnesium deficit, and to consider doing a magnesium supplementation or taking a close look at their diet and so on. So how can the research on this page is from about 40 to 45 magnesium supplement studies where blood pressure was the outcome measured. And we know from these studies that magnesium supplements in the range of 300 to 600 milligrams per day may not lower blood pressure in either normotensive subjects or in non-medicated hypertensive subjects. But they do show a rise in their serum and plasma magnesium that occurs after about 3 months, improved endothelial function, improved arterial flex, lower C-reactive protein, improved fasting glucose, improved insulin resistance, improved sodium metabolism, meaning by just taking magnesium supplements, there's an increase in sodium excretion, there's a decrease in red blood cell sodium, and also there's improved cholesterol parameters and triglycerides. All of these occur at the 300 to 600 milligram per day range in normotensive patients as well as hypertensive patients who are not taking any medications. Now, magnesium supplements as low as 240 milligrams per day will lower both systolic and diastolic blood pressure in hypertensive subjects who are taking antihypertensive medications, the beta blockers, the ACE inhibitors, and so on. We do not know if this low level of magnesium supplementation will have all the cellular benefits that we see up in the upper part of this slide. Supplements can play a role. You can also use waterborne magnesium. There's a few high magnesium waters out there. There's IM injections. Even if you're not going to do a magnesium load test, you can still use them. 50% magnesium sulfate is what is usually used. You can, if you think a person has just had a traumatic event and you want to minimize it, you can just do one. You could do them weekly. You can do them monthly. Infusions, day-long magnesium infusions are being used more and more, and you can read about it with that reference there. And for people who cannot handle large amounts of oral magnesium supplements because of GI issues, magnesium supplements are very safe. And with food, high magnesium diets are not dangerous at all. But with supplements, sometimes people get GI problems, loose stools, and even diarrhea. Sometimes there's promising research in the transdermal magnesium area that could suggest that oral magnesium therapy can also be helped with transdermal magnesium therapy. But overall, magnesium supplementation is so safe. And there's so many magnesium deficit symptoms that it has been said about by one doctor, George Lundberg, who has suggested that magnesium is the emperor of all maladies. Magnesium deficiency is the emperor of all maladies. And he suggests, as well as Dr. Mildred Seelig, way back in the 60s, that if you see a person with some or several of these magnesium deficit symptoms, considering how hard it is to assess magnesium status, how difficult, how impossible really it is to find out if a person has a magnesium CLMD and what degree of CLMD they have, supplements are so safe. Why not just try some supplements in the 300 to 600 milligram per day range, depending on how severe their symptoms are, and see if it helps. It is a safe way to go. And with that, I want to thank you very much for your kind attention and to see if there's any questions that you might have.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dr. Rosanoff and Dr. Volpe. There are quite a few very good questions, but I'll try to tackle some of the ones that came in groups first, if that's okay with you.
Okay. Yes.
So here's one that we had a lot of questions on. Is there a role in the development of autoimmune disease or treatment of autoimmune disease for magnesium?
Oh, I do not know much research on that. I will tell you what I do know, that when magnesium is required for several of the immune functions of the cell and of the physiology, and when magnesium gets low and the calcium comes rushing into the cell, it sets up a cascade reaction, which is telling the cell, be active, be active, be active. For example, if it's a muscle cell, it'll contract. If it's an immune cell, it will kick off the immune response, even though there's no invading pathogen coming in. That is some of the basic biology that's involved in a low magnesium status that sets up an intracellular high calcium to magnesium, setting up what we often call the fight or flight reaction for that cell. Dr. Volpe, do you have any information on specific autoimmune diseases and magnesium?
No,
I do know that in Crohn's disease, magnesium has been very, very helpful to people with Crohn's disease. But it's just a few practitioners out there that are using it, but they're using both infusions of magnesium to bring them back, and also transdermal magnesium, as well as with the Crohn's disease, some of them have lost a lot of their GI tract, and so giving oral magnesium supplements wasn't so helpful. So they're going the infusion route as well as the transdermal route with good results.
Another question that came is a little bit more practical. Does heat from cooking impact magnesium content of foods?
I don't believe so. It's the solubility that can impact it. If you boil your vegetables in water that is a low magnesium water, and you pour out the water, then you can lose a lot of your magnesium. But no, heat is not a factor in magnesium content, as it is for some of the vitamins.
And then another common set of questions were, is there any interaction with caffeine intake and magnesium status? And also, is there any impact of alcohol intake on magnesium status?
There's a very large impact of alcohol with magnesium status, and magnesium deficit was first described in alcoholics. And in fact, alcoholic cardiovascular disease, we believe now, is from when you take alcohol in excess, that it enhances the excretion of magnesium in the urine, and so that there is a loss of magnesium on a daily basis when you drink alcohol. And caffeine, I have heard that, but I have not studied it myself to look at the peer-reviewed research. I think that there are some espresso coffees out there that are in the USDA food composition database that show a high magnesium content for a cup of espresso coffee, high potassium too, 120 to 160 milligrams, which of course is great. But it's not in all coffees, and it's not in the instant coffee, and it's not in the homemade coffee. So I'm not sure if the one they used just was using a high magnesium water, which is a possibility. But as to the caffeine seemingly increases the metabolism. And of course, as the metabolism goes up, the magnesium requirement goes up, because remember, 80% of that increased metabolism requires magnesium. So the need goes up when the adrenaline reaction takes place, or when stress is high, or when there's a response to drugs such as caffeine.
If I can just add, but for people who are caffeine naive, it would be a greater effect. So if someone drinks coffee every day, which actually does have magnesium, as Dr. Rosanoff stated, one of the reasons, of course, that they're finding, researchers have found that coffee intake decreases risk of death is likely due to the fact that there's high magnesium in there. So just as a side note, if someone drinks coffee daily, that effect of caffeine would be less than if someone is a caffeine naive person and doesn't has much caffeine in their diet.
Thank you.
And I think we have time for one more question. There were a series of questions relating to amount of magnesium intake over the course of the day, both questions relating to food intake and supplementation. Is it best to take, or is it best to consume small amounts of magnesium throughout the course of the day?
That is a really good question, and I'm afraid I do not know the answer to it. I have not studied that. I do know that there is a diurnal cycle with magnesium in humans and many other organisms, including plants. I have heard before, take your calcium in the morning and take your magnesium at night before you sleep, but I've never seen any research associated, but it's because I've never taken a look, so I can't comment. Maybe Dr. Volpe can give us some ideas on this.
Yeah, sure. It is a little better to spread the intake out throughout the day if that's possible, only because absorption would be greater. However, but in general, we studied some intakes in our lab where we've had people with supplements take them either all at once or taking them throughout the day, and absorption was equal, and as well as no GI upset if they the type we gave them was a low GI upset chelation, but it didn't seem to matter with magnesium whether it was taken throughout the day or all at once. But typically with most micronutrients, taking them spread out throughout the day is a little bit better for increased absorption.
Well, thank you very much. We have come to the end of the hour. Thank you, Dr. Rosanoff and Dr. Volpe, for taking the time to share your expertise with us today.
Thank you for having us.
It is our pleasure.
And thank you to Nature Made for supporting this excellent program for the Today's Dietitian audience. To our audience, of course, thank you for joining us and trusting Today's Dietitian for your continuing education needs. Your attendance certificates are now available for downloading by following the instructions on your screen.
Instructions for credit claiming and downloading handouts should be up on your screen. You must complete a brief evaluation of the course in order to claim your credit and download your certificate. Registered dietitians should use code 175 when recording this activity in their professional development portfolio. If you are watching this webinar on our YouTube channel, please log in to ce.todaysdietitian.com, click on the Webinars tab, and select this webinar in order to complete it for credit. If you are watching this webinar on our CE Learning Library website, click Next, or return to the course start page and select the evaluation step to complete this webinar for credit.